Hey everyone, thanks so much for being here tonight. So before we get started, I want to mention a few things. So first, if you have a cell phone, if you can please turn it off or put it on silent mode. Next, if you need a hearing assistance device, please let us know and we can get you set up with that. If you need to use the restroom, we have them located just beyond the entrance on the left-hand side. And if you enjoy coming to programs like this, please be sure to check out our upcoming programs that we have on our website. We also have events brochures by the circulation desk that you can check out. So today's event is co-presented by the Stamps Gallery, University of Michigan Museum of Art, and the Ann Arbor District Library. In conjunction with the exhibition, Hear Me Now, The Black Potters of Old Edgefield, South Carolina, which is currently on view at UMA until January 7th, 2024. And this event series is sponsored by the U of M Arts Initiative. Here today, introducing the artist Ebitenyefa Baralaye is going to be Outreach and Public Engagement Coordinator at Stamps Gallery, Jennifer Junkermeyer-Kahn. So please help me welcome her.
Okay, thank you, Jennison. Great. Hello, and hello, everyone. As Jennison mentioned, my name is Jennifer Junkermeyer-Kahn. My pronouns are she, hers. I am a curator and writer based in Detroit. I'm also the Outreach and Public Engagement Coordinator at Stamps Gallery. Yeah, I'm just really thrilled to be here, really excited about this series of programs that I will also talk a little bit more about and then talk a little bit about the exhibition before having Ebby come up. Just want to tell you, if you haven't been to Stamps Gallery yet, we're very nearby, actually just right around the corner from the library here. And we currently have 2 exhibitions that are on view. So if you have a chance, I hope that you can stop over and see them. The 2 exhibitions are Untitled Stories, Part 1, which is the 2023 Stamps Faculty Exhibition, and includes the powerful work of Jim Cogswell, Carlos F. Jackson, Heidi Kumau, Frank Nuno Corcu, and Amelia Yang. We also have on view The Blessings of the Mystery, work by Carolina Casedo and David De Rosa, which examines themes of socioeconomic, environmental activism, encounters between history and memory, indigenous rights, and the formation and distribution of knowledge. Both of those shows will actually be on view until Saturday, December 9th. Stamps Gallery is always free and open to the public. Our hours are Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Thursday, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. For more information about the work that we do and upcoming happenings, you can visit the Stamps Gallery webpage on the Stamps School of Art and Design website. So with that, yeah, I'm pleased to welcome you. In addition to Jennison welcome you, I'm pleased to welcome you to this special event, The Vessel as a Metaphor, an Artist Talk by Ebitenyefa Baralaye. It's actually the 5th program in the series, Pottery as Poetry, a public program series that's running throughout the semester at the University of Michigan and Ann Arbor, throughout Ann Arbor, which has been facilitated by Stamps Gallery visiting artist, Detroit-based artist and educator, Ebitenyefa. The Poetry as Pottery public program series has included presentations, readings, listening sessions, and hands-on ceramic vessel-making workshops that highlight the ceramic traditions and untold histories of enslaved potters in the antebellum South, while also invoking Ebby's own practice in dialogue with themes from the groundbreaking exhibition, Hear Me Now, The Black Potters of Old Edgefield, South Carolina, which is currently on view at the University of Michigan Museum of Art. The Pottery as Poetry public program series and partnership came together through the hard work and collaboration of Hear Me Now co-curator and UM professor Jason Young, Stamps professor Amelia Yang, UMA's Lisa Borgsdorf, and myself, with the support of the library and the Arts Initiative, and of course the vision of Ebby. It is through these multiple partnerships of people from different organizations coming together that we're able to make this possible. And we already talked about who brought this program together, so I won't mention that again. Over the past month, Ebby has led multiple hands-on workshops where groups of students and the public created their own ceramic vessels with poetic inscriptions for the future. Just yesterday, participants came together to glaze their vessels that were BIS-fired, and having been glazed, are now getting ready to be fired again. Once those ceramic vessels are complete, these works will be on view at Stamps throughout November and into December. I'm so excited about that. And I'm excited to see some people who were at those workshops here today. Thank you for coming. So just want to talk a little bit about the exhibition, Hear Me Now, The Black Potters of Old Edgefield, South Carolina, which is a landmark exhibition of more than 60 objects representing the work of African-American potters in the decades surrounding the Civil War. It is a reckoning with the central role that enslaved and free Black potters played in the long outstanding stoneware traditions of Edgefield, South Carolina. It is also an important story about the unrelenting power of artistic expression and creativity, even while under the brutal conditions of slavery, and about the joy, struggle, creative ambition, and lived experience of African Americans in the 19th century American South. Hear Me Now is co-curated by Adrian Spinozzi, Ethan Lacer, and Jason Young. It first opened at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, then traveled to the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and is now on view at UMA until January 7th, 2024. And I just really, it's such an important exhibition. I really encourage you to go see it if you haven't had a chance. After UMA, we'll actually travel to the High Museum in Atlanta. So before I introduce Ebby, I just want to thank a few people who made this program possible. Jason Young, Amelia Yang, and Lisa Borgsdorf. I also want to thank Ben Teague, Matthew Pritchard, Hayden, Grace, all the Stamps Gallery assistants, as well as the entire Stamps Gallery staff, Stamps School team, and our great partners at UMA, that we continue to appreciate their ongoing partnership. Huge thanks to Sherlana, Emily, Dennison, and Matt, and all the incredible folks at Ann Arbor District Library for being amazing to work with. And of course, thanks to our sponsors of the program series, the Arts Initiative. And then, yeah, of course, thank you very much to Ebby. I'm so grateful and honored for your partnership on this program. It's really been an exciting journey that kind of continues, and this is sort of this moment, one of these like great highlight moments. Okay, with that, Ebitenyefa Baralaye is a ceramicist, sculptor, designer, and educator. His work explores cultural, spiritual, and material translations of objects, text, and symbols, interpreted through a diaspora lens and abstracted around the aesthetics of craft and design. He received a BFA in ceramics from the Rhode Island School of Design and an MFA in ceramics from the Cranbrook Academy of Art. Baralaye's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally at Friedman Benda Gallery in New York, David Klein Gallery in Detroit, Shoshana Wayne Gallery in Los Angeles, the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, and the Korea Ceramic Foundation in Icheon, South Korea. Baralaye has participated in residencies at the Watershed Center for Ceramic Arts, the Hambidge Center, and the Elizabeth Foundation Studio Program in New York City. His work was featured in the Objects USA 2020 exhibition and catalog, and he was an AICAD Fellow at the San Francisco Art Institute from 2016 until 2018. He is currently an assistant professor and the section lead of ceramics at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit, where he resides and works. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ebitenyefa Baralaye.
Thank you all for coming. It's a real pleasure having been able to work with the students, and I call them students. I'm so in this mode of being a teacher, but I guess those who've come out to engage the workshops and the programming. It's a really fantastic exhibition, Hear Me Now, and I hope you've all gotten a chance to go and check it out. When I found out that it was coming to I guess the region, to Ann Arbor, I was really excited, and then further excited when Jennifer reached out to me about the possibility of engaging the exhibition with these events. So thank you, Jennifer, for extending me this opportunity, and also for being the the hands and logistics behind making this all work and all happen. Yeah, so I guess in looking at the exhibition, getting to spend a lot of time with the works in the show, I found myself reflecting on this question of what is a vessel. There are a number of really beautiful, really potent, really powerful vessel works in the show. I'm a ceramicist. I'm a sculptor. I kind of go back and forth now, I would say, and like how and whether or not I define myself as a potter. If there are any ceramicists among you in the audience, you can understand that, like, you know, being a hardcore potter is like you're in the studio every day. That's what you do for a living. That's one way of thinking about what it means to be a potter. There's the very kind of distinct example that we see in the enslaved people who made the pots that are featured in the exhibition itself. And that was, you know, a very, I would say, unfortunate sort of history of oppression and mode under which to kind of be a maker and be a creator. But what really kind of comes through in the work and in the exhibition is this resilience of the creative spirit of the potters whose, I would say, histories and legacies are now being celebrated, as well as their sense of touch, their sense of understanding of what is beautiful, their sense of celebrating that in spite of everything that was going on around them, in spite of being really devalued as individuals. So I feel like I'm kind of a little bit closer to embracing this identity of being a potter, but also really humbled by the work that I see in the exhibition, and also by the examples that I see in the exhibition as well. But kind of stemming back to this idea of, like, first, what is the vessel, even before getting to what is the ceramic pot. So the vessel, it's something that contains, it's something that holds. It's, you know, it could be understood as being, from a very foundational sense for us as human beings, the womb, the way in which we all kind of came into the world, this thing that received a lot of genetic information, you know, cellular and genetic information, and that kind of defines us from birth to death. In a lot of ways, our kind of first vessel is sort of our mouths. You know, you might not think about that, but you know, like, our mouth becomes this tool that we utilize, especially as, you know, very, very young beings, as babies. And then I would say very much so for other animals. It's a way of exploring and understanding the world around us by literally kind of putting things into our mouths. I'm reminded of when my younger niece was maybe about, like, I don't know, a few months old, and just holding her and her taking my finger and biting on it, and me realizing, oh, this is the way she explores the world. This is how she kind of understands what's going on around her. It becomes this sort of vessel for activating this world that she's kind of just getting to know. As well as sensual beings, it's kind of a key way in which we strive to get to know each other, a key way in which we strive to share the most intimate part of ourselves, is sort of like romantic connection through the act of a kiss, through the act of being present with one another in that way. I guess if we think of our bodies as being vessels, then our mouths are kind of like the opening to those vessels, and then what we say, what we speak to each other, how we engage with other people becomes really reflective of what's inside of us. So we can almost describe ourselves in being, you know, metaphorical vessels, as being sort of filled up over the course of our lifetimes with experiences, other words from other people, the things that we've taken in, and then also the things that we're then pouring out to other people as well, the things that we're saying, the things that we're doing, that we're investing in the lives of other individuals. It's kind of breaking down this idea a little bit more and how it reflects itself in my work. I'm just going to share some of my pieces. So this piece here is titled One Piece. Each one of these vitrines is a representation of a certain environment, whether it be my room, my art studio, my home, And each one of the ceramic elements in those vitrines is a representation of a mode of me existing in that environment. So thinking of myself abstracted into an emotional state that's represented by clay, almost as an avatar. With this piece here, Nest, thinking again about this idea of the body being a vessel, not necessarily literally so, all of the vessels that are presented in the Hear Me Now exhibition could be understood functionally. But I would say as a ceramicist and somebody who also understands himself to be a potter in certain ways, I'm really curious and intrigued by the vessel form, whether or not it's actually being utilized. I grew up with a mother who collected a lot of things, and among those was vases and vessels, and it always sort of intrigued me how these things that are intended to be functional have a way of speaking to our everyday lives, have a way of speaking to the way in which we understand life, even when they're not being utilized, even when they're not being sort of choked full of flowers or food or anything else. And I'm also really drawn to the way in which the vessel just kind of mimics the composition of the body itself, and having a foot, generally speaking, a waist, a shoulder, and then a head. This is something that I talk through with my students. I'm teaching a wheel throwing class right now, and I typically teach wheel throwing maybe once or so a year, and recognizing that as they're making these elements on the wheel, they could think about them almost figuratively. They can think about how a pot stands in having these elements that we can relate directly to what it means to have a body. And then we have this understanding of the body, speaking to not only who we are as physical beings, but also as spiritual beings with this piece, Animus Ori. So I was born in Nigeria. I've lived most of my life here in the United States, but I would say a lot of the traditions that I find that I resonate the most with creatively are informed by my West African origin. So here, Ori is the Yoruba word for head. So the Yoruba people are the people from which I descend. And in Yoruba culture, the head is believed to be the seat of the soul. So much so that when it's represented, it's always represented really, really large, really big, to kind of emphasize that significance and that prominence. And animism, or animus here, is understanding that nature, inanimate objects are imbued with a certain kind of spiritual energy, a certain kind of spiritual potency. So we can say to a certain degree, the tree that you're looking at outside, the materials that we engage with every day are kind of vessels for this energy of life that we're always kind of like responding and reacting to as human beings. I kind of also take that comparison literally as well. One of the vessel forms that I was particularly inspired by in the exhibition were the face jugs, in this tradition of enslaved potters specifically, either representing themselves, kind of thinking about sort of the exaggerated nature, almost the caricature of a face that's represented on these face jugs, as representing themselves, as representing this sort of tension of being, in being enslaved, in sort of working under oppression, as a picture of their oppressors, but really as a distinct way in which enslaved potters at that time were taking on a certain kind of license to speak about identity, if not about their own identity, about a certain kind of collective identity that really kind of touched me, and I would say gave me pause at a moment to think about the potter's wheel as a tool for making sculptural decisions in a way that I hadn't before, and kind of really set me up, I would say, conceptually, and in a lot of ways technically, for exploring portraiture via clay, but also via this understanding of what the vessel is relative to portraiture. I would say too, that if you want to externalize this idea or understanding of what the vessel is beyond like the mouth, then you have our hands. Our hands are kind of the first vessel. The cupping of our hands would have been the first bowl, the first plate, the kind of first way in which we're able to take in the world around us and kind of bring it to ourselves, to allow us to eat, to allow us to study, to allow us to sort of engage these things. So everything that I create and everything that we see and understand to be a vessel is kind of mimicking this, is just mimicking this motion that we still do as human beings and very much still do as very young human beings. A number of the pieces that I just showed were featured in an exhibition titled A New Realism that was presented over at Friedman Benda Gallery in New York City. And I remember when the curators approached me about this show, I was really drawn to the title, this understanding of what is real and how that is reflected specifically in West African culture. And I would say in West African culture, you have this understanding of the real, not just being what's representational, what your eye sees, but the real being the agency and the ways in which certain things hold power and hold meaning. And that's what I see reflected, I would say specifically in West African portraiture. So not that when you see a figure, a Yoruba figure represented, that they're kind of a one-to-one of what you would see, but a one-to-one of how identity is understood in that culture. And that's always, I would say, kind of inspired me aesthetically to kind of rethink my definition of realism beyond this label, I would say, of abstraction, beyond sort of this sense in which abstraction is this sort of taking of what's real and stylizing it, when it's really an understanding of kind of taking of what's understood and representing it in what's made and in what's created. I don't think you can have a conversation about creating any ceramics, and specifically ceramics vessels, without first talking about land and the relationship that I have to land as a creative person, as well as the very kind of unfortunate, intense relationship that the enslaved people in the Hear Me Now exhibition had to land, specifically having been taken from their land and brought to America to work under very oppressive conditions. But thinking more broadly, for me as a creative person, as a ceramicist, the material that I work with, clay, comes from the land. It's dug from the earth. I'm kind of reminded of that fundamental connection. Anytime I touch clay, anytime I make a vessel, anytime I make a sculpture piece, that the medium has been mined from the earth, and I'm dependent on the earth to provide that medium to me. I think about the way in which the land not only sustains me as an individual and as a creative person, but the land's also kind of interwoven into this sense of identity that is very spiritual. To the left here, or rather on the slide here, is a piece that's dedicated to Abram. And if you know Abraham from the Old Testament, was this vessel of a being through which God promised to create a whole nation. He promised to create a whole people, which is Israel. And I was always drawn in reading religious text about this connection to specifically land and to sort of like the body being a vessel through which God does things and moves and kind of shakes and creates things and makes things happen. So the ground is not only what I walk on, what I rest on, it also is what provides the food that I eat, the things that go into my body. It sustains me overall, both spiritually and I would say physically as a being. I'm not, I would say, naive, though. A few slides back, I shared this piece, which is Ori Afara Petrita. So Ori, again, is the Yoruba word for head. Afara is the Yoruba word for bridge, and Petrita is the Yoruba word for father, fatherland. Not Yoruba, I believe it's a Greek word for fatherland. So my dad was also Nigerian, my mother was as well. I mentioned that I mainly grew up here in America. So kind of grew up in this place of kind of, I would say, being in between cultures, being in between spaces. And I would say through the stories of my parents, through my own research, but also just through the stories of my parents, just really trying to bug them to tell me more when they could, gaining an understanding of what it means for me to have a fatherland. I was always kind of I was always kind of jealous of that among my friends, who would say, I was born in this city and we're in this city now. I was born here and I can go there whenever I wanted to. I would say that there was always been kind of a tense relationship that my parents have had to their place of birth. And I don't know if any of you here who are also immigrants have sensed this or navigated this, where because of negative experiences, because of hardships, weren't very enthusiastic about returning, weren't very enthusiastic about even encouraging my siblings and I to engage our land or even so much even the culture much. And I've been taking it upon myself now as an older adult to kind of understand both the land and the culture from which I'm from more. But again, I'm not naive in what it means to navigate that and what it will mean to experience that. My hope is actually to be able to go to Nigeria this coming summer with my mother to see her homeland, to see where I was born, which is Port Harcourt and River State. But I love the way Glenn Ligon kind of positions this duality here of like, okay, you're from there, but you know, like, what's it going to be when you actually go back? And he says, I went to Africa, I went to the motherland to find my roots right. 700 million Black people, not one of those MRFers. I don't know if I can curse, so I figure I'd edit that out. But I love this piece and how it kind of speaks to this tension of being a part of the diaspora and maybe even having a tense relationship with the land and the culture that I'm from, while kind of recognizing it to be so formative in who I am, both biologically and, as I mentioned, as an artist, in the things that I create and in the things that I make. I'm willing to kind of take that connection and make it much more local. I would say too, stepping back to this understanding of land being connected to things that are grown and built that sustain me as an individual. I feel like you can't, or in talking about vessels, you're also talking or referring to a language of care. And I feel like this is very much reflected in the vessels that are present in the Hear Me Now exhibition. And I'm also really sort of impacted by the way in which clay and ceramics as a material speaks to care. Think about the ceramic elements that are in your home, whether it's a toilet, a tub, a mug, a plate, a bowl. These are all things that are fairly intimate, have a kind of intimate kind of space and place in your lives. And I've always understood clay within that mode of intimacy and enjoyed the way in which it kind of navigates that domestically. I lived in San Francisco for about 2.5 years, right out of grad school, and encountered in San Francisco. It's a really beautiful city, but also has a really large population of people who are unhoused. And I would notice as I would walk the streets that I would see, cups, mattresses, things, just kind of strewn along, and I'd realize, oh, this is somebody's home. This is where somebody slept last night. This is where somebody's going to return tonight. This is somebody's living room. And this sort of inversion of intimacy from indoors to outside kind of really stuck with me. And I thought to kind of explore that intimacy, again, as it relates to clay, where normally the things that I make out of clay are inside, are indoors. And I took it upon myself at this piece, Context Tenderloin, to take these abstractions of my left and right foot and to map the block immediately around the apartment that I was living in the Tenderloin neighborhood of San Francisco. I remember as I did this, both feeling, I guess, a greater sense of intimacy with my neighborhood, and also being really concerned that people will think I was crazy. But if you've ever been to San Francisco, you know that much crazier things are going on. And so nobody bothered me or even like noticed me as I was going about doing the things that I was doing. But yeah, I also think, I mean, even going beyond this idea of the vessel just being that which we create and contains, rather thinking even more broadly about what a vessel is. I studied furniture design for about a semester or so when I was in undergrad, and really appreciate the way in which furniture itself operates as a vessel for the self, as this sort of kind of container for the being, whether it is a chair, or again, I mentioned beds and things of like, or a tub. Here I have a folding chair. There was this kind of was a season in my life when I moved to San Francisco, when I was just kind of bouncing around quite a bit. and realized that my connection to land then, as it related to sort of my migration across America, was very sort of transient. And the folding chair, when I first moved to Detroit, was actually one of my first few forms of furniture. When I first moved to Detroit, I had a folding chair and a folding table, and that was kind of it for about 3 months while I waited for the rest of my belongings to come to San Francisco. And it was both a kind of a nice meditation on what it meant to kind of live very simply, but also in making this piece, Folding Chair, an interesting way of thinking about the way in which clay lives in sort of a certain kind of language of transience. For those of you who work with clay, and even for those of you who don't, you might just kind of think about what is clay as ceramic, so fired earth. But for the makers in clay, clay goes through these really kind of distinct stages from being dug out of the ground to being processed, to being wet and handled fresh, sometimes out of the bag or out of a box, to getting leather hard, to drying, and then to being fired. And those stages are all really kind of beautiful and rich in their own right. And I found myself wanting to both explore and celebrate those myself, and did so with this piece in a way that both spoke to my transience in relationship to environment and land, but also the ways in which the material of clay transforms over time, here allowing this wet clay over the course of the duration of this exhibition to crack off of this chair. So this is the way it looked kind of to the start of the exhibition, and then towards the end, you can see shards popping off there. I talked a little bit about the unhoused and sort of the impact that had on me as I was living in San Francisco. And again, just really intrigued by the ways in which certain things that are very intimate and very special to us when they're indoors become almost really like abject when they're taken outdoors, specifically mattresses. You can see one to the top left. And it got me really kind of questioning domesticity, or how domesticity comes into play in the way in which I understand clay, even specifically in the way in which I understand what it means to engage the vessel form. And one day when I was at home, I lived in a very tiny studio apartment because that's all most people can afford in San Francisco. And I remembered I had these little tiny kind of rivulets, these kind of like almost like teardrop shapes that were made out of clay, and decided to kind of create an impromptu installation right there on my bed. So as you can see here, grab some pillows, these ceramic elements, a ready-made pitcher, and some flowers, and created this kind of composition that spoke to, I would say, this reshuffling of the material dynamics of domesticity that existed in my home, in my studio apartment, and kind of really, I don't know, felt activated by that collage, by myself taking that prerogative to kind of redefine both the materials and sort of the structure and order of domesticity at that moment. I never went on to show this piece, but it's always been a really kind of special part of my portfolio. A piece that does exist in my home right now are the dishes that are in my sink, and this is a fresh shot. This is a fresh shot. This is from this morning. So in thinking about the vessel as being this metaphor for the human being, as being also this kind of like medium through which we take things into our body, I think it's also very significantly a way in which we share experiences and way in which we build community. By creating dishes, we're actually inviting other people to dine with us and to eat with us, to experience life with us in a way that I would say is both very special and entirely unique to the world of ceramics and pottery. But along with this sort of understanding of collective care, I feel like the vessel also speaks to the ways in which we either do or fail to care for ourselves. And I don't know whether or not my full sink is me avoiding caring for myself by not addressing the dishes, or caring a lot about myself and not about the environment that I'm in. But just kind of taking a moment to kind of rethink of it, rather than being sort of like this pit of dread It's this pit of like crafted objects. You know, you can see there a handmade bowl, a couple of them, you know, that I'm kind of, you know, sensitively worried about getting chipped or broken. But it represents for me, oh, like this material, this space, this environment, each one of those dishes represents a meal. They represent a way in which I showed up for myself. And they represent also potentially a way in which I showed up for somebody else if I was inviting someone else in. So I like the idea of kind of thinking of my full, you know, sink of dishes as being charged with care and maybe being sustained in that way for a little longer, rather than being something that I have to dread or avoid. I don't think also that you can talk about ceramics or vessels um, outside of a language of craft, which I would say is very deeply connected to care, understanding what it means to be a maker and the traditions the traditions that inform the processes of making, particularly when it comes to vessel making. So this is a much younger version of me at college, staring at a vase form that I'm modeling and then going to go on to slip cast. Just kind of really thinking about how the specific form of this vase evokes maybe certain ideas of the body, really captures light in very specific ways, abstracts maybe ideas of nature to, I owe a lot to my experience in undergrad to grounding me in sort of a technical understanding of the material that I feel like I'm still benefiting from today as a much older artist. I actually wasn't very excited at all about learning to throw on the potter's wheel. I just kind of thought to myself that the potter's wheel was a limited and I don't know, kind of like, yeah, a very limited tool to make asymmetric things. I'd done mainly sculpture work as a young artist and very quickly grew to appreciate the discipline that pottery required and the way it sort of forced me, or rather encouraged me, to pay more attention to the material, what I was throwing with, as well as more attention to its potential. You know, what a vase could be, what a cup could be, what a bowl could be, simply beyond understanding it as a utilitarian object. But I would say even within this space of exploring sort of like the discipline of making was very much drawn to the ways in which I can take a simple utilitarian idea of something as straightforward as a vase and abstract it or think about it more sculpturally. In this case here, you could see these forms that I've modeled and then slip cast and dedicated. I'm a big fan of jazz music to Sarah Vaughan and Miles Davis. I'd say a material understanding and broadening that, or rather being able to investigate that further, is something that's always been a part of my practice too. I do work largely with clay, but especially in this conversation around craft and the the ways in which you're able to be sort of refreshed in approaching a different material, but through your same hands, through your same sort of ability to comprehend and be creative. And here I have, I guess, two sets of information, if you will, one rendered in clay and one rendered in muslin. I started sewing when I moved to San Francisco. I was really drawn to sort of like a meditative practice of setting up the sewing wheel, as well as engaging with material that I would say had a different way of pushing back on me. You know, if you've ever worked with clay, there's this dialogue that you have with a medium that you very much have to listen to in order to make things that are successful. And I was intrigued by kind of that shift, specifically with textiles. I'd also started becoming very much inspired by the textiles of Gee's Bend and thinking of the quilt as this, if you will, vessel of cultural information, of this record for people and of their community. Here I've taken a Meiping vase shape, which is a traditional Chinese vase shape. And again, as I spoke to earlier, I'm not thinking about it being functional, but just investigating it as a form. I've muted that functionality by removing the top, and it now kind of becomes almost this abstracted head, this abstracted core. The striations in the form are meant to kind of evoke the texture of skin. And in thinking of texture, I love the way in which clay, depending on how you handle it, depending on how you glaze it, depending on how you form it, can visually seem to represent one thing, and then physically in handling be something entirely different. So this piece titled Fount appears to be very light, very airy, almost like feather-like, but to the touch it's actually incredibly heavy and very, very sharp. I feel like in order to create a pot, and I don't know how familiar you all are with the sort of the processes of pottery, but whether it's a pinch pot you're creating or a coiled pot, it was really fun getting to work with those who came out to the workshops and see their focus and their ability to produce really kind of beautiful and complex things, even from very simple techniques. You have to really listen to the material. I feel like in order to create anything out of clay, you have to be present in a way that makes the object that's being created this marker of your presence and this marker of sort of your time there on the potter's wheel behind the studio, paying attention to what you're doing, kind of making space for certain decisions, being grounded in the fundamentals of like my body posture, and again, in the foundations of particular processes, whether it's centering, again, wedging, are all incredibly important in making something that's then going to become a part or a piece in my life. I guess in thinking about what grounds me the most, and again, I do love the way, and this is something that I remind my students, this is something that I remind my students of all the time, that if they're not kind of grounded physically, and if they're not grounded in their understanding of sort of like the steps that go into making a vessel, they're not going to make a very successful vessel. And I would say my physical self, in a lot of key ways, are very much grounded in my family, in the way in which I understand the things that I'm connected to, the people that I'm connected to. So here pictured is my youngest niece, the one that was biting my finger when she was just a few months old. And then to the right there is my mother and my older niece right outside of church. I'm really kind of drawn to the way in which I would say people engage the passing on of generational knowledge and the dynamics of that, not only in my family, but also in any family. I talked a little bit about my parents being sort of resistant to, I don't know, maybe not so much resistant, but a little bit sort of hesitant to divulge much about their past in Nigeria. But it was really kind of a pleasure of mine over the course of, I would say, the final months of my father's life, getting to have very specific conversations with him about his background, about his past, before he passed away, before he died. It's still, my mother is still alive. Getting snippets from my mother in dinner time conversations or in phone calls every now and then. I would say the dynamics of family, whether good or bad, very positive or very challenging. These are the things, or this is the thing that probably grounds me the most as an individual. And I would say the same is probably true for most of you. In this grounding, though, I feel very much kind of vulnerable to the things that James Baldwin is speaking to here in this little excerpt from the creative process. This way in which we can understand that life is full of things that are very, very much extreme. So birth, death, suffering, there's enough sort of like existential dread that we're kind of like navigating through on a daily basis to really kind of prompt us all to just kind of scream right now, but we don't do that because society can't function that way, and we can't, go on about our general business that way. But I love how James Baldwin kind of reminds us as creative people and us as humanity, but I would say thinking specifically about creative people, that it's the creative person's role to wake society up to those extremes, to embrace them, to engage them very much in their work and very much as individuals. And for me, that's meant, as far as kind of thinking of my ancestors, when it comes to my Nigerian lineage, kind of embracing the unknown, embracing what it means to accept that I'm not fully aware of. I don't know anybody on my father's side of the family. I barely know anybody my mother's side of the family. And I had this really wonderful moment where I kind of connected with a piece by the potter David Drake, where he says on one of his, he's inscribed on one of his pots, I wonder where is all my relation, friendship to all and every nation. And I'm probably the most taken with the first part of that poem, this kind of sad and very sort of sober reflection on his part of losing loved ones, having, kids, a wife sold away in slavery. It's this very kind of like mournful line. I wonder where is all my relation. I can only imagine the emotions and sort of like the tensions that he felt as an individual and sort of reflecting on that. And for me, it's naturally entirely different. But I think about I think about my relatives. I think about the people that are related to me that I don't know, and I ask myself a similar question, although not the same question, but a similar question. I wonder where my all of my relation is as well, and I would look forward to getting to know more of them. Hopefully soon with this upcoming trip to Nigeria coming up. It's interesting for me, kind of knowing my nieces and my family members up front. When I got the opportunity to create an exhibition that's essentially dedicated to them here, titled Family Ties. Did I go back here? Yeah, here, titled Family Ties. What I thought, one of the things that my father always wanted when he was alive, he would say to me, Ebby, make a drawing of your sister, make a drawing of your mom. I'm like, Dad, I'm making sculpture pieces. I don't have time for any of that. I'm making real work. That's not where it's at. But in creating this exhibition, so this is an exhibition that I both curated as well as had pieces in and reflected on how I would go about representing the loved ones in my life. I was still very much informed and inspired by the face jugs that I referenced earlier, and realized that I didn't want a representational sort of depiction of my family members, but again, this almost like soul image of them, this reflection of them in the material that's more emotive and more sensitive, and not just a one-to-one of how they looked. Oddly enough, I never kind of directly shared these pieces with my family members. I don't really think that it's important to, because I know them as physical beings in my life. But it was a great honor, I would say, to get to kind of think about how they exist in my life, the ways in which I love them, the ways in which I know them, the ways in which I kind of, wrestle, with them, and then interpret that into these works, again, inspired by, very much so, by the vessel form of face jugs. Just when it comes to sort of understandings of symbols as well as patterns and motifs that come through in my work, I draw a lot of inspiration from the pictographs and I would say symbols of West Africa. Here you have a masked performer who's wearing a mask that has these specific striations and patterns on it, all of which, and I would say the masked performer themselves, generally speaking, operating as representation of a spiritual identity or a spiritual form of engagement as an intermediary for their community, as a way of kind of representing what that community is. And I think about what that means for myself here, kind of borrowing some of that formal language in a vase form that's informed by the baobab tree, the sort of trunk of a baobab tree, and some of the striations that you're seeing here on the mask of the masked performer. How do I create things that speak to my sense of identity and my sense of community as being somebody who's living here in America, now here in Detroit, with the people I know and the family I have? I would say still really impacted by the life and work of David Drake. Again, I encourage you all to go and take a look at the exhibition, but he kind of lived in this era of a lot of oppression as a Black person in America. And even with the poem that I just kind of shared, I wonder where is all my relation, friendship to all in every nation. There's this kind of like hopefulness in the second part of that poem that I didn't really touch on, this openness to unity and this openness to recognizing the value of creativity, forming a bond that's constructive rather than one that's destructive, that David Drake still held space for, that also really inspires me, but I also kind of find hard at times to leave space for myself. I created this piece here titled "There Must Be a Place." I feel like we can all kind of relate right now to a certain degree to this phrase and what it means across various conflicts or across various issues that you're either facing personally or that we're facing as a country. I feel like very much so thinking of some of the war conflicts that are going on. I'm kind of dwelling on this and thinking about this. There must be a place where this isn't the case. There must be hopefully a place or a time in our future when we'll stop killing each other and we'll stop hating each other the way we are now. I can only continue to hope that this will happen someday in very specific ways for us as human beings. I've been reflecting a lot of what it means for me to understand myself as a Black person in America, again, relative or kind of through the experience and the ways in which I've navigated understanding my identity through my parents. That all came to a very specific head, naturally about, 2020, when we as a nation experienced the killing of George Floyd, as well as the unrest in our country due to the numerous killings of unarmed Black men in America. And I thought to myself, or I remember thinking to myself, what is it about being a Black man that makes me a target? What is it about sort of, so many Black men in our country sort of just going about their lives, being the individuals that they are, that seem to make them a threat politically to the police in that country, in this country, politically, specifically a certain kind of mark. And I don't know that I really have an answer, but I just knew that I needed to create something. I knew that I needed to kind of make something to process that. And I found myself in the course of processing my understanding of identity as a Black man in America, really coming back, not to politics, but to the relationship that I've had with my father and the ways in which he's taught me to be a man, the ways in which he's taught me to be an individual, both for the better as well as for the worse in some degrees. I didn't have the closest relationship with my father. I mentioned my love of jazz music, and I kind of think a lot about one specific piece. I don't think it was written by Louis Armstrong, but it was very beautifully sung by him. Black and Blue, one of the refrains is, "What did I do to be so black and blue?" I remember thinking about this, just kind of after having heard about the, I don't know, umpteenth killing of another Black man in this country, and just thinking to myself, wow, like, yeah, what did Black men do to become targets the way we are? Again, I don't have the answer, but I've found making the work that I've created to be a really kind of effective and meaningful way for me to kind of wrestle with these emotions. I also think of the vessel as being a certain kind of social record. So we see this in the case of like Greek urns and vases that will depict the exploits of society, whether it be, I don't know, war or the Olympics. I feel like there's a way in which, as I mentioned earlier, clay itself kind of exists as this societal record. In this case here, this piece Indwell, speaking to the existence or the presence of a well, noting the presence of water and noting the ability as a result of there being a well with water to support a society, to support a whole community of individuals. I also like the way, again, kind of going back to some of the tensions that I've felt around the sociopolitics, in this country. I really enjoy the way in which the materials that I work with, and perhaps yourselves as artists work with, they don't lie. When you create something, it is what it is. There's no spin on it. When I create a vessel, there's no interpretation of what it is or isn't. It's being what it is right there in front of me. And I remember at a certain point really kind of taking a bit of comfort in that there's this very direct relationship that materials have with truth. I also think about how clay not only operates as a material sort of intimacy, the things that we find in domestic environments, but also things that could be structural. I was reflecting specifically on the artisan Oluwe of Ise, a Nigerian artist who made a number of different artifacts and utensils for kings and royalty in Africa. And kind of was like, all right, like what would it look like for me to take this aesthetic understanding that I've brought to how I'm approaching sculpture and vessels and apply that to sculpture, or rather apply that to architecture. So here with post 1 and post 2, these are intended to be columns. They're both kind of fairly minuscule right now. And my intention is at some point to kind of have them exist architecturally in a space. I mentioned my father a few times now, and his nickname for me when I was really young was Big Head. Apparently, I have big head. Right after he passed, and he passed unfortunately due to COVID, I started to kind of think about, and I think our nation also is really starting to reconsider the value and the agency and the purpose of monuments that we live with and around, and grieving my father and kind of creating space to do that, both as an individual and with family members. I was very much unprepared for that. I just didn't know what to do. My father was the first close family member that I had lost, but in thinking of what it meant to kind of create a monument to him, the most appropriate thing to do felt like creating a piece to him. He was very much a champion of my creative work as an artist, but I also felt a real honor in ultimately being able to create a vessel that would house his body, house what remains of his body in the form of his ashes. I think about not only, and I live with him it's right in my living room every day. So I think about sort of the vessel as being this potent container of what remains of him. I think of my mother, who will someday also move on, and the vessel that I will create for her. And I also even imagine the container that I might someday choose to make for myself, and the power and potency of being able to choose and create that space for myself in the material that I'm working with clay. I want to end off with this last quote by Chris Rock. I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy. He says, "Some people say life is short and that you can get hit by a bus at any moment, that you have to live each day like it's your last. BS. Life is long. You're probably not going to get hit by a bus, and you're going to have to live with the choices you make for the next 50 years." I connect this to the material that I work with clay. Everything that I make is going to outlive me. Everything in the Hear Me Now exhibition has outlived many generations and many lifetimes, both of their creators and the people that have followed them. So every time I kind of come to my potter's wheel or approach a bag of clay and I'm going to create a vessel or a sculpture, I'd like to be very much aware of the responsibility that I have in creating something that's going to last for the ages, but at the same time still not allowing that to cripple me from making anything at all. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Abby. We have a few minutes if anyone has any questions, so I can pass the mic around.
Hi. Thank you for sharing your work and your stories about it. I also just wanted to add a quick note. My mom and I's nicknames for each other is Big Head. So, yeah.
Nice.
Wow.
Wow.
But I was curious to know what advice you have for people making work, especially related to family. Like there's a piece I'm working on right now for my thesis, and it has to do with generational trauma and my relationship with my mom. And I'm not to say that all the pieces I'm making for it represent challenging things, but there is that aspect, and I'm kind of debating with myself on how much to share for the future exhibit with others about that, and still feeling like it's personal to me, but also sharing enough where I feel like it represents her the best way it can.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's fair when you're making work to allow yourself to embrace that some things you do create just for yourself. Like, where is that line? And maybe you need to make a piece, and it's not about, or it's not going to be something that you'll share publicly, but it's going to be a way for you to process things personally. And then thinking about what it is you choose to share, I would say think very specifically about the communities that you're sharing with. I know, I don't know, for me, when my father passed away, and I went to another friend's daughter's funeral not too long ago. I was like, why do people invite people to this stuff? Like, I don't want anybody that I don't know at my funeral or my loved one's funeral. It seemed odd to me to have so many people come to what seemed like a very intimate expose of someone's life and of grief. So I think it's okay, even in how you share, to say, okay, like, this is the community that I want to share this with. These are the people that I want to share this with, and it isn't everybody. It isn't the public, but it is specifically my friends, or it is specifically the people that I know in this city, or the people who are coming to this show. Beyond that, I mean, it seems like you're probably doing this, but like, just gather a lot of information and allow yourself to sit and process it for as long as you need to. I know that was also a really big thing for me in grieving. I needed to not give myself a time frame and to not force myself to kind of um, let go and move on beyond a time when I felt ready to. So I think sort of giving yourself a lot of leeway to do what feels natural, and then a lot of leeway to just sort of not do what doesn't feel natural, is really important. But also reflect on how what you would share could really be meaningful to someone else, or could really be meaningful to anyone else, if you did want to think about this broadly. And I feel the same way about sort of talking about my father and his passing. Like, I'm a fairly private person on a certain level. I'm like, why do people need to know this? But on another level, I realize that other people have, really complex relationships with their fathers, and might benefit from kind of seeing how I'm navigating that myself as an artist. So, yeah, yeah.
So,
Hey,
hey,
how's it going?
good, good. Thank you so much for this. This is awesome to
That's
kind of
good.
see more into your work and hear more about your process and what it all means to you. As an artist who is trying to kind of like reconnect with his creative roots, but is really submerged in the craft element of ceramics, what are some ways that you think that I could re-inspire myself and pivot to take the more conceptual ideas of ceramics more seriously in my personal ceramic space?
Wow. So if you all want to know what a real potter looks like, it's Ricky. That's a great, yeah, that's a really great question. One thing that I wanted to touch on is so for the potters who made the work in the Hear Me Now exhibition, I'm really interested in what their pots meant to them. They're, to a large degree working under duress and had to kind of create these things. But what did these pieces mean to them? And I would say that it's not only fair, but entirely rich to be in a place as a creative where you're just exploring, or very intensely exploring, the dynamics of craft in something as simple as a bowl, in something as simple as a cup. There's a whole, I would say, lifetime of complexity just in that alone. And I don't feel like any potter, any maker who considers themselves kind of mainly focused on functional items needs to feel in any way, I don't know, pressured to kind of think outside of that focus, because there's so much there. And I feel like we're kind of now in a place with art in America and truly embracing the complexities and nuance of craft alongside abstract expressionism and all sort of like the other strains of contemporary art. But personally, I guess for what you've described, I mean, there's no substitute for something that I have a really hard time doing myself, which is going to your studio even when you don't want to. And maybe this is what you do already, but you're going to discover the most about yourself when you commit yourself to making, even when you don't feel like the inspiration to create is there. So creating space for you to not know while continuing to move is a really big thing as an artist. And I would say too, creating space for yourself to enjoy the works of other people. It can become so demanding as, you know, a teacher, an artist, to just be in your studio and make the next thing, whether that's for your own fulfillment or, you know, because you have a business or whatever, that it could be easy for us to forget that we're really supposed to enjoy work too, not only our work, but the work of other people. So I was incredibly, I would say, blessed by getting to spend so much time at the Hear Me Now exhibition and taking in so much of the beauty and the care and the nuance in those works in ways that have now excited me to go back to my studio. So it might seem obvious, but I know as an artist, the pressure to create can be so overwhelming that we forget how important it is for us to eat and to feed on the creativity of other people in a way that encourages us to do the next thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more. And maybe Ebby will have time for some more questions
Yeah,
at
sure.
the end too, but.
I just want to thank you. We use the term awesome. Your talk really filled me with awe.
Oh, thank
And
you.
one other thing, the photograph of your mother, what was her dress made out of? It
Oh.
looks so much like clay and tactily. And
You know what? I will call her today and let her know that someone complimented. She would really like that. But that's interesting. I didn't even really notice that. It was, yeah, it's like a brown. If I can kind of jump back to that really quickly. There we go. Yeah, she's kind of repping some clay there. And yeah, there's a beautiful kind of pattern on that dress too. I took that picture and I remember that day. Yeah, no, she'll like that you like her dress. But it must be, I don't know. Yes, it has like an iridescence to it. So it's probably not cotton. I wouldn't know specifically the material, but again, she'll be glad and flattered that you noticed. And thank you. Thank you for coming too.
Really, thank
Yeah.
you. Your work is amazing,
Thank you.
and your thoughts
Oh, thank you.
are just.
Okay.
I'm sneaking in one last question. What's up next? I know you mentioned a trip to Nigeria,
Yeah.
but I think you have some other amazing projects coming up that we
Yeah.
want to know about.
I need to get to my studio. I have a solo show opening up at Klein Gallery in May. So I literally need to, like, my studio's in a basement. I need to lock myself in my basement, make work, and then, you know, as I mentioned, also get out to film myself from time to time. But that's gonna be big. Yeah, it's gonna be big for me. And you are all invited, and you can just kind of look. You can just look up Klein Gallery, or if you're connected to me on Instagram, I'll be posting, you know, information about it there. Yeah, that'll be the next big thing, and it's gonna be big for me. So, yeah, thank you.
Well, let's give one more round of applause for Ebitenyefa Baralaye. And if you have more questions, he might be able to answer some. Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you, Dennison, too, and Matt, up in the booth there. Thank you.